Welcome, everybody. My name is Jake Friedman. I serve as the Senior Coordinator at the Virginia G. Piper Center for Creative Writing at Arizona State University. I have not watched the British Bake Off. I will have to soon. We need a new series in my home. Thank you so much for coming to Dispatches from the Field, Student Archivists and BIPOC Memory with Mia Johnson, Myra Khan, Lourdes Pereira, Elizabeth Quiroga, and Jessica Salow, presented with the Labriola National American Indian Data Center and the Community-Driven Archives Initiative at ASU Library as part of the NEA Big Read. NEA Big Read is a program of the National Endowments for the Arts in partnership with Arts Midwest. Before we hand it over to our partners for more formal introductions and the event, I just have a few technical components and points of process to go over. Since we are in a Zoom meeting, since we need points of process in order to make this a simulacrum of the experiences we used to have in person. Today's event, we're going to have about maybe like a 20 to 30 minute presentation from Labriola and the CDA initiative to kind of set up their work and talk a little bit about the history behind that. Then we'll move into the discussion with the student archivists, and then we'll have probably 15 to 30 minutes of audience Q&A towards the end. So while you are welcome to use the chat features on Zoom, and we actually really encourage that, it's a great way to try to recreate some of that sense of connection, share thoughts, leave comments, interact with folks, fun emojis, no non-fun emojis, please. We won't be doing audience Q&A until the end. So if you have questions, I think it's best to do those in a separate document or jot them down on a piece of paper just to make sure that we don't lose them. We will do our best, right? During the presentation, which we are viewing right now, you can adjust that using the View Options button at the top. If you just click that, you can have sizes fit to window. You can also adjust the size of your Zoom window as well. You can adjust the size of the bars and all those things. Arrows, great time readjusting things. We're also having live closed captions provided automatically by Zoom. So you can show or hide those using the show subtitle or closed caption button at the bottom of your screen for access. We will hopefully have, if there are links or things that are mentioned, we will do our best to drop those in the chat as well. Zoom has some etiquette during the presentation. Please make sure that you are muted in order to minimize disruptions or background noise. We might do it for you, nothing personal. It just gets very noisy. While we love seeing faces, you're welcome to leave your video on and off as you please. It's a more intimate event tonight. Sometimes we can have bandwidth issues. So if your connection starts getting a little bit wonky, try turning your video off. That might improve it. If you want to rename yourself as well to include your pronouns or just change your first name, please feel free to do that. That's a great practice. And you can do that by, I think, just finding yourself in the Zoom and renaming. You can also find yourself in the participant list. If you have any questions or any technical things that come up, you can send me a private message, or you can also text me or call me if you get kicked out. I will be on the technical role today. I have written a script to deliver all of this information efficiently, and it has been efficient. 5 minutes, great. So now we're going to get to our presentation and our event. So I'm going to introduce a specialist, I believe, Jessica Salow of the Community-Driven Archives Initiative at ASU Library. I'm going to read Jessica's bio, and then I'm just going to say a few words from my heart about the work that they're doing as we kind of think about the Big Read and the work that that grant is trying to do here at the center, right? So Jessica Salow is currently a specialist at Arizona State University Library with the Community-Driven Archives Initiative, which was established in 2017 through the generous support of the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. Sorry, I don't know why that was hard for me. She obtained her master's in library and information science from the University of Arizona and is an alumna of Arizona State University. Her current work with the CDA team focuses on building relationships with historically marginalized communities such as Latinx, Black, Asian, and Pacific Islander, Indigenous, and the LGBTQ+ in Arizona by creating intergenerational and intersectional safe spaces for people within these communities to acknowledge historical traumas. We do this by centering the lived experiences of these marginalized communities and invite members to share their knowledge with others through workshops we host with community partners. This is perhaps one of them. There are others coming up soon. We'll speak to that later. Our work, or their work in this space, is meant to redefine the traditional definition and function of an institutional archive and bring to light archival material that has been previously overlooked by institutional archives. The work that is taking place at the CDA initiative and Labriola has in some ways really been a central thread of the work that we're attempting to do with the NEA Big Read Phoenix, which is ultimately an attempt to celebrate Indigenous literary arts and culture across the Valley. I think for me personally, just being adjacent to the work and thinking about that and incorporating that intention and practice into my own life, however smally, I think has been like a really powerful and transformative experience. I really do believe that this work provides a way to for individuals to counteract these huge historical forces which have essentially tried to take land, right, take resources, erase cultures. I think that this work is such a stellar example of theory in praxis, right? We don't need me to say these nice things about it, but I really just do think that speaking personally, just being around it has been such a gift and something I'm honestly going to carry with me through my family, through my artistic practice, through the future. And so I'm just so grateful that they keep letting us present opportunities for them to share their work with you, and that you are hopefully sort of inspired and transformed by this work as well. So I think with those things being said, if you don't mind perhaps putting nice things in the chat or using that like weird clap emoji, maybe making some background noise, please welcome Jessica Salow and the rest of the team at Labriola and the CDA initiative.
Jake, thank you so very much. I really appreciate that opening and that introduction. I would like to say that we are very honored to be here tonight and to talk about the work that we're doing, but at the same time, we're really appreciative of partners like yourself and the Piper Center in order to spread this work not just through ASU, but through the communities that we serve and the communities that Piper serves as well. So thank you so very much. We really appreciate you. As Jake said, this is the panel for the NEA Big Reads Phoenix, celebrating Indigenous literary arts and culture across the Valley. Yes, this is the Dispatches from the Field, the Student Archivist and BIPOC Memory panel that Jake said, in collaboration with the Virginia G. Piper Center for Creative Writing. We are very honored to be a part of this, and we're so excited to talk to you tonight about the work that CDA and Labriola is doing, and our students who are the backbone of the particular work that we are doing. So next slide, please. So our agenda tonight is just, as Jake said, we're going to go over a little bit of the Community-Driven Archives Initiative and the work that was started in 2017 by our lead, Nancy Godoy. And then Labriola, National American Indian Data Center, will also be just talking a little bit about their work in this field. And then for the last part of the panel, we'll go ahead and do the dispatches from the field and speak to our students about the work that they do with us here at ASU Library and through CDA and Labriola.
So, Skukudinik, Anya Napchugi, Alex Soto, Anya Amjik Awasik, Donoptam Amjik. Good evening. My name is Alex Soto. I'm originally from the Donoptam Nation, from the community of Cells. In this capacity, I'm the assistant librarian for the Labriola National American Indian Data Center. And for the presentation, the panel, as mentioned, this is a student-driven conversation outside of just some of the background information that we'll share in a moment. But before we get started, we wanted to start in a good way with the ASU Library's Land Acknowledgement Statement, just so we situate the work that we're doing and how it relates to not just at ASU, but the region, our tribal communities, everybody that, ASU, or at least the communities we work with here at ASU. And so the ASU Library acknowledges the 22 Native nations that have inhabited this land for centuries. Arizona State University's 4 campuses are located in the Salt River Valley on the ancestral territories of Indigenous people, including the Acoma O'odham and Peepash Indian communities, whose care and keeping of these lands allow us to be here today. ASU Library acknowledges the sovereignty of these nations and seeks to foster an environment of success and possibility for Native American students and patrons. We are advocates for the incorporation of Indigenous knowledge systems and research methodologies within contemporary library practice. ASU Library welcomes members of the Acknowledgement and BIPOC and all Native nations to the library. And so that being said, as mentioned with our role here with the Labriola Center is that as detailed in the history, this was an initiative started by the Chicana archivist Nancy Godoy here at ASU back in 2017, and through its impacts with BIPOC communities, Labriola began to, started to embrace the work in which we're doing now. And so we'll get into our slides eventually, so you'll hear me again at one point, but I'm gonna pass it back to Jess and she can elaborate on the rest of the program.
Thanks, Alex. I really appreciate you taking on that. So we'll go ahead and introduce everyone who will be speaking tonight. As I said, my name, Jessica Salow. As Jake said, I am the specialist with the Community-Driven Archives Initiative. And as Alex said, he is the archivist for the Labriola National American Indian Data Center. And I'll go ahead and have our students go ahead and introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, my name is Myra Khan. I use she, her pronouns, and I am one of the student archivists who works at the Community-Driven Archives Initiative with Jess and Nancy. I've worked in this position for about 2 years now, and I am really excited to be here tonight and to be able to share everything that I have learned with CDA and how it relates to other aspects of my life, and how these interactions between CDA and Labriola have really contributed to a lot of the really important work that we're doing.
Yeah, it's Ashikato student Shea Jeremia Johnson and Shea. Nakaidan initially, not as Edibash's team. Touch to Edesha, Tachitni Desinale. Hi everyone, I am Jeremia Johnson. I am one of the student archivists at Labriola. I've been with Labriola for about a year. And as Myra said, I'm really excited to share a student perspective on tonight and what I've learned with Labriola so far and what it means to be working alongside CDA work. And yeah, I can't wait to get into it tonight. Thank you. Yeah.
Good Harinik, Ani Napchiki, Lourdes Pereira, Ani Varhiacharatam Chiuame, Sirmak Amjad, Sirmak Jackson Chuk Kabaki Skikiktam. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lourdes Pereira. I'm Hiacharatam in UMA, and I come from the San Lucie district of the Navajo Nation. I am also a Labriola student archivist, and I'm also excited to be here tonight, and I can't wait to get into everything. Sapa, Hugudai.
Skokurinig, Anya Napchuk, Elizabeth Quiroga, Anya Napamjud, Chukson, Anya Aniwood, Donatam. Hi, my name is Elizabeth Quiroga. I am from Tucson and I'm Donatam. I am also a Labriola student archivist. This is my first semester working as one, and I'm super excited to share my experience and hear everybody else's thoughts. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate you taking the time to go ahead and introduce yourselves. So let's go ahead and get started with the presentation. And so as you can see here, a grant that was established in 2017 is titled Engaging, Educating, and Empowering Community-Driven Archives Initiative at ASU. And as you can see from this picture, this is some of our past and current team members here at CDA. And so I just want to take the time to say thank you to Nancy Godoy, who is on this call this evening to bring us all together here today, and to actually her vision to start this initiative here at ASU Library, which I'll get into a little bit more. So go ahead with the next slide. So one of the reasons why we and Nancy was very particular about wanting to start this initiative, and just the reasons behind why marginalized communities face the particular situations that they do, is because in 2012, there was a survey that was conducted called the Arizona Archives Matrix Project. There is a website that is available if you would like to go ahead and Google that and look it up. But basically, during that particular study, archivists from around the state of Arizona came together and wanted to understand a little bit more about the holdings that were available within the archives. And these repositories are here at Arizona State University. There are also archives at University of Arizona, archives at the Northern Arizona University. The Arizona Historical Society was also surveyed, and then some other institutions around the state were surveyed. And what came out of that was a pretty startling revelation to a lot of the archivists during that time, that the Latinx, Black, Asian Pacific Islander, and the LGBTQ plus community here in Arizona make up over 42% and probably closer to 50% of the population now here in Arizona, but are only represented in 0 to 2% of known archival collections for each group within Arizona archives. So if you really think about that particular statistic, that is pretty appalling and pretty egregious when it comes to the population statistics of marginalized communities here in Arizona. And so what needs to be asked and what we want to convey to people is that there are historical gaps within the archival record here in Arizona, and it needs to be addressed not only within institutions, but through the communities who do the work that is necessary to keep their memory alive and their stories alive as well. And so this is the reason why, as historically marginalized communities, it is upon us to preserve our own stories and our own memory. And this is how some of the CDA initiative was really started, was that Nancy was doing community work through the time she's been here since 2012. And she has really taken it upon herself to engage with her community and engage with the people within the community to figure out how we can assist them in just understanding the place that they're in and where they come from. And so when Nancy had the opportunity in 2017 to start this initiative, she really took this survey to heart. She really understood that as a person who comes from a marginalized communities, it is absolutely important to take this particular knowledge that the archival record here in Arizona does not reflect the population here. And so we want to have that known to the community and then have them also take that information and, while not be upset or sad about it, but take it upon themselves to speak to how they are impacted by the erasure of themselves within the historical record. I'll go ahead to the next slide. So understanding the legacy of white supremacy is really important in the work that CDA has been doing. So when we talk about documented subjects within Arizona, and if you could hit that so that you can show up. Yeah, so if you look at these documented subjects that are well documented, and then I put this in quote here so that I can make sure that I get you to understand that when we talk about documented subjects, we're talking about from white anthropologists, we're talking about some of the known, things that Arizona is known for. And so, if you look at this, Anglo pioneer history, Arizona history before 1912, which was when Arizona became an official state, business records, crime during territorial time, Geronimo and Indians, quote unquote, military and mining history, tombstone and wild herb. So when you look at these particular subjects, you do kind of understand that the legacy of white supremacy is very real within archival holdings here in Arizona. And because of this particular legacy, it is unfortunately true that there was some bias that did happen through archival collection policies, through just the way that archivists do their particular work. And marginalized communities were not well documented, or not documented at all in a lot of respects when it came to understanding these communities and the people that travel throughout the through the state. And so white supremacy, as we all have heard over the last year, and we continue to hear and have heard for a number of years and through generations, has had a lasting impact on not just people, but on the systems that are in place when we're talking about documentation of people who are not white, of BIPOC communities. And when we say BIPOC communities, we're talking about Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, not just here in Arizona, but throughout the nation. And so it is very incumbent upon yourself to examine the legacy of white supremacy and how that impacts not just your thought process and the possible biases that you may have when it comes to understanding the world that you live in, but understanding that the systems that were in place did branch off, and white supremacy is very much in and embedded in these systems. And that is what CDA really wants to bring to light, is that because of the legacy of white supremacy, a lot of these marginalized communities are not documented at all. And there is a wrong that does need to be corrected when it comes to understanding the history of marginalized communities, not just here in Arizona, but throughout the country. Go ahead to the next slide. So these are some of the pictures that Nancy has obtained over the years about how this legacy of white supremacy has really impacted communities. And so if you look off, I believe it's to the left, this particular picture was taken during the SB 1070 days. I hope most people on this call are familiar with SB 1070. And so if you're not, SB 1070 was a state legislation that happened, I believe in 2010, where the state legislature really started having a policy to where they were increasing their racial profiling of Latinx communities here in Arizona, and specifically in Phoenix. And so as you can see from one of the person's shirt, Arpaio, Joe Arpaio, was very much involved in a lot of the SB 1070 situations that went on throughout the state. And there was a high profile view of Arizona when it came to that particular legislation. And so when we're talking about the legacy of white supremacy, we need to understand that because of that, historically marginalized communities are unfortunately dehumanized through legislation and through the erasure of themselves being within the historical record. And so it is absolutely imperative for us to understand that white supremacy and the dehumanization of marginalized communities go hand in hand, that they are connected, and that it is of utmost importance for us to make it apparent, not just to our politicians, but to people within our communities, that because of the erasure of people within the historical record, racial profiling, dehumanization of these particular communities does happen, and it is very real and has lasting consequences, not just for the people who are involved, but for the generations that come after that. And so we want to make it clear and known that because of this, particular thought process, we need to make it clear to marginalized communities that they matter, that their stories matter, and that they matter. And being a person of BIPOC, I'm a Black woman. And so being a part of this particular community, this particular work is very personal to me. It is of utmost importance on my particular end to understand and to see how systems that have been impacted by white supremacy can impact and do impact my community, not just through the work that I do, but through my everyday life. And so as a person who is within the library field and who is a BIPOC person, I feel it really is important for me to speak out and to speak truth to power about the ways in which white supremacy and the legacy of white supremacy when it comes to archives is apparent. And Alex can attest to this, and anybody who does work with me can attest to this, that I don't shut up about these things. I consistently talk about this, and sometimes it makes people uncomfortable, which again, you have to examine your uncomfortableness where this is concerned, when people are literally crying out to acknowledge themselves and to be heard about the ways in which they matter, and that their stories matter, and that they have a right to live and to thrive within this culture, or within the systems that we do live in. And so I just want to make sure that, we take that time to kind of examine the biases and examine how white supremacy has dehumanized communities, and the ways in which we can show up for communities, and how that work looks within each individual, whether through that be your professional life or your personal life. Go ahead to the next slide.
Actually, Lourdes was going to jump in.
Oh, yes, please, Lourdes, go ahead. Thank you.
No, I was just going to say I completely agree with everything Jessica stated, and every time I'm just in the room when she's speaking, I enjoy it so much. This is I added a slide, or a photo on the upper right-hand side. This photo was taken at a healing ceremony about I would say a year ago. It was, of course, pre-COVID, and the wall looks completely different right now, but this is a picture near Quito Baquito, so it's right next to the border, and that's this, I would say the construct or what you would see that's in the middle of the photo is a border wall, and this is, you know, before Trump did what he did. So it's a lot taller now and it looks a lot different. But this was a healing ceremony for Ervaipia, which is one of these sacred springs for the Hiachiratam and of course the O'odham tribes. And a lot of us came together, the O'odham on the US side and then also on the Mexico side came together and we took this photo. And for me, I did believe that this was a really, just as Jessica's saying, it's really impactful on our communities. And I do believe that this photo really shared that, and this is why I wanted to also share it on this slide. I'd also mention how even though, right, you do see that Native Americans are mentioned more at a higher space, going back to what Jessica stated as well, there was a lot of dehumanization type of vocabularies happening, right? There was the savage-like people and myself being Hiachiratam and us living out near the most desolate parts of the Sonoran Desert, they'd call us, of course, savages, but also like we were foster kids because we just moved from place to place, basically. And so these terms were just so derogatory. And that's how, going back to what Jessica's stating on how they impact our communities, myself as a young Hiachiratam woman, how I see myself, I have to go back to this because, of course, Natives and Indigenous peoples only spoke orally, of course, but you know, seeing these documentations and how our people are viewed, it's horrific. And that is why it's so important for us to change this narrative and to reclaim this space ourselves. So I completely agree with Jessica, and I appreciate just sharing a little bit of that with you all. Sapa Hagedai.
Thank you so much, Lourdes. I really appreciate you taking that time to talk about that particular photograph. We can go ahead and go on to the next photo. So through our initiative, we were doing in-person workshops prior to COVID. And so I just wanted to very quickly go over a couple of the workshops that we were conducting that really reached out to marginalized communities and talked to them about how to preserve their oral traditions or their particular memories. So this particular photograph is of a actual person who came to a CDA event that literally brought a container's worth, probably more. Nancy can, if you would like to pipe up and speak about this particular photo. This is Carlos Dominguez. His family has been in Arizona for a really long time, I believe, before it became a state. And so he brought his entire family archive to one of our events in a plastic bin. And so what we do is that, especially during our archives and preservation workshop, we sit down with communities and we speak to them about how to arrange, describe, and preserve their materials, whether that be photographs, documents, anything along those lines. And we do impart upon them archival praxis that as archivists, we need a master's degree to work at an institution like ASU. This is where we learn through our master's degree program on how to do this particular work through arrangement, description, and preservation of that. And so we really try to make these workshops friendly, very community focused, but also not try to bog them down with technical terms that they may not understand or may have some issue because they haven't gone through formal training as an archivist to do. And so with Carlos and with others who come to our archives and preservation workshop, I'm gonna go off camera real quick. Let me grab this box here. We give out archival boxes. So this is one that I have here in my home. This is a kit that we do give out to people at our archives and preservation workshop. And this is an acid-free archival quality box that we give to people. And in that box, you can get acid-free folders, different size Mylar. I have a couple here in that, I don't know if you can see, it's kind of transparent, but so we do give this out. We also have a bilingual booklet that we do give out as well, which is right here. at these events that we let community members take with them and let them go ahead and start documenting and preserving their history through just some of the ways in which we impart our professional knowledge onto them. And so this particular workshop, I always very much appreciate because we get lots and lots of stories, lots and lots of people who are looking to either get started with the archiving journey or are interested in genealogy as well, because genealogy and kind of archives do in some ways intersect. And so we definitely take that time to speak to them about through the Archives and Preservation Workshop, how to preserve their documents, how to make sure that their photographs do last generations and that they can pass them on to people, and how to describe that if you have digital files, how to describe those and pass those on and save those for people who would like to go ahead and look at your particular archive going forward. You can go to the next slide. And so we also have another event that we did in person prior to COVID was a scanning and oral history days. This particular event, again, another really great event, which was a 4-hour event that we would come into the community. We usually partner with a local business. Recently, we've done a lot of partnerships with the Palabras Bilingual Bookstore, even before they moved to their new location, where we would come in and bring our own equipment, which were scanners and computers, and scan up to 50 items for people for free and place them on a thumb drive to give to them to start their archiving journey. We also would set up oral history stations, and you can see here in this picture that one of the attendees at one of our events did want to sit down and do an oral history. And so this is through I always get this wrong, Story Center, I believe is the name of it. Thank you. I see nods. So yes, Story Center is the software company that we use in order to record oral histories. And so it's just an iPad that is on a tripod. And so you just hook it up and put a mic on somebody and get them in a background. And through those Story Center stations, they can either prompt somebody and start having them talk about a memory that is either prompted, or they can just start talking about a specific memory that they would like to speak about. And we usually did oral history talks with people up to 30 minutes. And so those really are some of the ways in which we did connect with our community prior to COVID. I don't know if I have a slide. Can you go to the next slide to see if I have? So yes, so through our work, our student archivists really are the driving force of the work that we do. They are tasked with quite a bit of the work as well. And Myra can speak to some of her work, and so can the Labriola students speak to some of their work that they do with the communities. But we really do rely on them for digitization materials. We have some collections that we'll be making available via the AS2 digital repository here soon. We task them with outreach efforts. Our students have recently taken on conducting their own workshops via the Zoom platform now that we've gone virtual. And so it's been really fun and interesting to see them kind of shine and do the things that they have been doing and have learned through the CDA work about instruction to not just workshops that we do, but to the groups that they are come in contact with either on campus or off of campus. And it's been really amazing to hear them talk about the transformation that has happened to them when they come in contact with this work, which I'm sure the students will go ahead and speak about. So I just wanted to highlight that our students are amazing and that they really are the backbone of the work that we do, and we are so appreciative of everything that we come in contact with them and that they do for us. So thank you.
All right, I guess that's my cue. Thank you, Jessica, for such a thorough explanation of the work that we do at CDA. I think it's really important to understand where we're coming from in terms of understanding the work that we do. And so I always think back to the Arizona Matrix study and how each one of those communities is only represented 0 to 2% of archives, and how they, like, when I think of the Southwest, I think of like the history of like Mexico and how Mexico was basically everywhere where we are now, and like how there were all of these like indigenous tribes everywhere. and you think about like the gold rush and the Asian community in the West Coast and the Southwest, and you think about all of the Black community in like South Phoenix and everything, but you don't see any of that represented in institutional archives. And so that's really what sparked my interest in joining the team. So a little bit about my academic background. I am a sustainability major, and I'm minoring in political science and transporter studies. So I have no ambitions to go into library sciences, and that might make it seem like I don't really care that much about my job, but the truth is quite to the contrary. I find that archives are incredibly important, not just within libraries and within institutions, as is the norm in many places. Instead, having these like primary sources that we're taking from communities or the communities are preserving on their own is really important in countless other fields. Like I personally want to become a lawyer in the future, and so having a thorough understanding of the archival materials within different communities is something that is incredibly important to me, as someone who has a future as a lawyer, because in order to understand like the laws and the way that we rule in certain cases and how the law intersects with different communities and all of that, it all goes back down to history. And ultimately, the histories that we tell are formed based on the primary sources that we have, whether those primary sources are photographs, documents, oral histories, posters, pins, dresses, recipes, whatever it might be. And so that's really where I approach archives from. And so part of that then also leads into this idea of tearing down the ivory tower of archives. So as just explained, many archives tend to be institutional, and they tend to be very exclusive, and they are these white anthropologists who are studying communities removed from those communities, as if they're like Indiana Jones finding like an ancient statue with no context. But that's obviously not what's happening here. The context is there. The communities that these archival materials belong to are very much so alive. And so it's important for us to acknowledge that and to remove the barriers that exist between the archives themselves and the people who those materials belong to, and to have this context available, both in that we're empowering the communities to be the holders of their own, the holders and the curators of their own materials, but then also that they're there giving their input in what is ultimately going to be the story of theirs that is told in the future. And so that goes into this idea of political memory that goes back to what Lourdes and Jess were talking about, that the communities are these marginalized communities that we have been working with have historically not been the ones telling their own stories. And because of that, the memory we have in politics of, like, for example, the indigenous tribes in the state of Arizona or in the Southwest, these memories are made by like white anthropologists or white politicians or that sort of thing, who have their own political agendas, and which is why the misrepresentation of Indigenous people within archives is really a big part of why so many Indigenous tribes in the region were able to be like persecuted in so many different ways, and why the violence against them was justified is because this memory and this narrative about these communities was totally warped through narratives like archival history narratives. And so that's why it's really important for me to make sure that these memories and these histories that are being told are authentic, and that the communities to which these histories belong are given the autonomy to decide these. Additionally, I think it's something that I have experienced working with the community-driven archives is the sense of peer-to-peer connections. Like, we talk a lot about intergenerational archival memory, because naturally an archive is about the transition of time from one generation to another, like you would be preserving your grandparents' photos or something like that. But additionally, something that has struck me as very important is working with people of your same generation or your same age and preserving their memories, and then giving them access to archives as well. Because in many cases, like college students aren't really interested in archives unless they're going into library sciences or maybe are like a history major or something like that. And because they don't have much interest in existing archives, they also don't realize the importance of archiving their own experiences. And obviously, we know that many social movements across the country start with students. Like if we think of the climate strikes, those are all students. If we think about the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of that is overwhelmingly young people and students who are getting involved in these sorts of movements. And for that reason, it's really important to have that double-sided stress of archives within younger generations and like within people who I interact with, so that they're both knowing that their own movement is important, not only in the now, but also to future generations who will learn from it, but also that they're not starting from scratch, and that there are activists and movements who came before them, and that they can learn from those and feel empowered by that past that allowed them to be here now. And so ultimately, one of the big takeaways I have from my work at the CDA is this idea of being imperfectly perfect. This is something we say a lot within the field of sustainability, this idea that we don't need a handful of people doing sustainability perfectly. We need a lot of people doing it imperfectly. So we don't need everyone who's like, okay, I've got a Tesla, I always perfectly compost and recycle, I never fly anywhere. We don't need people like that. We need people who are like, okay, maybe today I will try to like donate some of my old clothes to a textile recycling facility instead of throwing them away or something like that. So it's all about these small changes we can make to our lives. And I really have that same approach when it comes to archives, because like we're human, we're not going to preserve every single thing we have, or at the same time, even if we are preserving things, it might not be the exact mint quality that we want it to be in. Like I can't tell you the amount of times at events people have come to me with photographs like, oh no, this photograph is stuck in this scrapbook, I can't get it out, like I feel so guilty, or like, oh no, like my grandma wrote on this photograph. Or it's like, it's okay, like we are human and we're documenting the human experiment or experience and experiment for that case. And having this notion that we need perfection in order for archives to work or in order for sustainability to work is really something that drives a lot of people away from both fields, because they feel like if they're not able to do it with this sort of objective perfectionism, it's not going to work. But that's really not the case. What we are trying to look for in archives, in our type of archives, is passion, love, and hope. We don't need perfection or this sort of like objective institutional sort of experience or expertise. We just need this kind of really raw passion for documenting histories. And that is something that I have seen extensively through the work with CDA and also with the Labriola team. And that's why I feel extremely fortunate to work with both teams. And I am very happy to be able to share all of this with all of you here today. So thank you for hearing my little spiel, and I'll go ahead and let the next speaker present.
Well, greetings, y'all. Once again, I'm Alex, and for my portion of the slide, I just wanted to contextualize how the work that Myra and Jess and Nancy, Kate, Denise, and Elise, their team, and all those who graduated or moved on, have impacted myself, and just the importance I've been able to take from that work. And so with Labriola, for those who don't know, it's the unit within the ASU library that focuses around Native library services and our collections. And so Labriola has been around since 1993. And in that time, the past curators, other past staff have been able to really establish Labriola as a community space for Native people here at ASU. And so in my time, I recently graduated from library school four months ago, but I started library school about 2 years ago, year and a half ago. And around that time period, I was exposed to a lot of the work Nancy was doing, Jess was doing with the CDA initiative, and really seeing the intersections between Labriola, the archive component with their work, and seeing that it came from a very well, from a community perspective. And as mentioned, with archives from all BIPOC communities, just the historical problematic issues we've had with, community members taking and documenting our material and then, curating it in ways that dehumanizes us. And so one, with Labriola being able to have the space just in their general archival collections to counter that, but also see the impacts of CDA work to further contextualize that our experience, as mentioned, our human experience, our tribal experiences in a way that's coming from us and not from some anthropologist or some outside quote unquote so-called expert. And so with my involvement, I was fortunate to be exposed to their work, attend their workshops, and then just being here at ASU in a position where I was asked to help lead that initiative here in the Labriola Center to help Nancy and Jess and others to be able to share that with the Native community. And so just to be brief, since 2019, Labriola has embraced the CDA model in terms of our service and outreach, and really has embraced it as a way to decolonize the archives. And it's mainly because it's culturally appropriate in terms of how we talk about archives, how our communities have talked about archives. And for Native people, there's no one way for these conversations, because every tribe, every community, every village is different. And so the beauty of CDA is that it has that space to really make it your own. And so with myself, being exposed to it and taking lead here at the Labriola Center, and then from there, really making those connections with the community and partnering with tribal libraries, partnering with tribal communities throughout the state to share basically all the work that was shared before with, with the overall CDA workshops, whether that's what we like to call decolonize, debunk the archives presentation, because that's always step one, is to have that conversation, to have that exposure, but also then leading into the scanning day and leading into oral history and how each community has a different history with that. And so to me, I think it really was a way to document our modern indigeneity, who we are, because a lot of times, we're put in the past, or, Native traditions are viewed as, only traditional, and there's nothing wrong with that with our language and culture, but just living here in town now, or going to school, or having that modern experience, that's part of who I am as an Indigenous person. And so with the work at CDA, it's been able to document that and really have that self-determination, for families, to communities, to really tribal nations to tell their stories. And so with that being said, it wouldn't be possible without our student workers, whether that's in CDA, whether that's here in Labriola. And so I just wanted to share that, just to set up like how it came, how we're partnered. We've been partnering since that time, and we're friends and colleagues now. And, these type of events, there's so many intersections around, BIPOC communities, and just that solidarity to know that we're all trying to tell our story and to reclaim that story in a way that situates who we are as, in this case, Indigenous people. And so with that being said, I'm going to pass the virtual mic, and that was my spiel as a staff member here. But yeah, that's just the background of the work here at Labriola.
Thank you, Alex, for starting us off like that. So like I said, I'm Lourdes Pereira. I did introduce myself. The interesting part about me, though, is that, see, I'm double majoring in Justice Studies and American Indian Studies, so I'm nowhere even close to like archiving or being a librarian or anything like that. And that's why, when it comes to this community-driven archives, I can honestly say that it has absolutely changed my life and my perspective on how I see things. I have this quote above, and it says, Indigenous peoples have always had archives and libraries. We just didn't refer to them by these designations. What we now know as archives stems from the European tradition of informational management, which has been thrusted upon us by colonizers. And this was a quote from the newest issue of the ASU Turning Points magazine, where actually Labriola had the honor and the privilege to have an article piece in there. And so the photos below are just a bit of my story as an archivist here at Labriola. And this was also published within the Turning Points magazine, which was really an awesome opportunity for myself, because I'm holding on the bottom left picture, I'm actually holding a photo of my great-grandmother. And she was the reason why I even came to Labriola in the first place. I was looking for a Quito Paquito cemetery book that she wrote with one of the national parks, and that's what led me to Labriola. And ever since then, it's just been this whole incredible roller coaster. But as I stated, I am Hiachiratam, and my tribe is non-federally recognized. And I would have to truly say that being a part of the community-driven archives with all the workshops that I've been able to participate in and the knowledge I've been able to gain, it's really restored so much of my indigeneity. And it's put so much importance of just preserving our materials. It's always been a fight with me and my tribe, and there's a long story, of course, on why we're non-federally recognized, and it can be very emotional for me to even share, but that's why CDA has really restored so much with me, because there was a time where even the Hiachiratam were documented by anthropologists that we were extinct. And with community-driven archives, what I love is that it restores the community and says, hey, you don't need, a big organization like a museum or these institutions to say, hey, we can preserve that for you. It's actually saying, hey, reclaim that space, and you tell us, and you can preserve that material without anyone taking it, which of course Indigenous peoples have a long, not so good history with that type of environment, I would say. But I've been able, honestly, to regain my own voice as an Indigenous person, as a Hiachiratam, as someone who comes from a non-federally recognized tribe, and be able to say, hey, I can preserve this material for future generations, because a lot of us do, a lot of our tribes are facing horrific issues. And, as my own tribes personally, not being from a non-federally recognized tribe, there's always that, well, what if we do become extinct one day? What if there's this ancestral knowledge that no one can keep? Where do we go from there? And it's this completely different perspective, but community-driven archives has completely, it's been so much and more for me in my journey as an Indigenous person, as a Hiachiratam young lady. So I'll hand it over to the rest of my coworkers, but Thapa, thank you for listening to a little bit of my story.
Thank you, Lulu. I always enjoy hearing your story. And so to go off that, I am Mia Johnson. I am a member of the Navajo Nation, and as I did in my introduction earlier. So a little bit about me, kind of like Lulu and how she talked about her major and her schooling so far. I am actually majoring in applied computing, and so I have a pretty heavily academic background in computer science, and so this is one thing that I have never considered with working with the library. And so ever since I joined working Labriola, I have discovered how diverse the library system can be, from like learning about the different database systems that the library uses to how actually getting in there and kind of messing around with the different systems and learning how they're kind of operated and what terms bring up which documents. And so that's been a very interesting process. And so before I actually joined the Labriola team, I was a part of other STEM activities and organizations. I was actually a part of ASIS, which is the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, as well as Engineers Without Borders at ASU. And there's just a couple of photos at the bottom of one of our biggest events, which is the 5K. And so I've always tried to get myself involved with the community. And so when I actually joined the Labriola team, I was actually very surprised to actually have the opportunity to start planning and organizing community-driven archive events with my coworkers. And so that's kind of like one of the big things that kind of contributed to me growing and learning about archiving, because otherwise, like being a STEM major, I've never gone deeper into the library other than doing homework there and studying. And so to actually get to work behind the scenes and learn what it's actually all about has been a very refreshing and truly unique experience, because otherwise, without Alex there kind of mentoring me and teaching me like what archives actually are, I would have never have touched the subject. And so one of my favorite things about working with Labriola is the fact that we get to write little posts for our social media pages. And one of the books that I've actually written about has been I'm part of the Labriola OpenStax collection, and so the book is actually called The Miko Kings, which an Indian baseball story written by Leanne Howe. And one of the things that kind of stood out to me within the very first chapter, within the first couple pages of this book, is a passage that talks about the narrator finding a journal, like a very torn up journal that's like on the verge of basically tearing apart. And one of the photos that they find inside is actually from 1907, and I believe this was on Oklahoma reservation territory. I could be wrong, but it was definitely on the Indigenous land. And so when I read this passage, it kind of clicked in my mind about how much I've grown into the archivist mindset and how impactful these community-driven archive events at Labriola has impacted me, because after reading the passage of the journal and how far back that the photo was dated, it made me realize without archiving, without Indigenous people in archiving, the likelihood of something like that actually getting properly preserved for future generations is very low. And so that kind of reinforced my mindset of why the CDA events that we run are impactful to the community, why we should have them out there to get the word out there, because otherwise, without Indigenous hands working with Indigenous archival material, there is a better chance for us to take a hold of our history, and so that way our future generations can be there to witness a story told, by us, instead of having that story taken away from us as it has been in the past. And so it's really revealed to me the importance of preserving family and community archives. And that's one of the big things I learned to appreciate with Labriola. Thank you.
Thank you, Mia, for sharing. So I'll be the last student worker to be speaking tonight. And like I said, my name's Elizabeth. I'm Thana Autumn, and this is my first semester of working at Labriola. And it has been a mind-blowing experience. I've worked there for nearly 2 months, and there's not a day that goes by that I don't think about it, I don't talk about it, and I don't learn something new. And so here in these photos that I've chosen is just a brief experience of a brief representation of my experience. And so coming from not knowing a whole lot about archiving, kind of having this idea of it in my head of like a white male archivist that doesn't know anything about the community that he's preserving. And I also think about it as like something for old people to do previous to working here. And now more than ever, I realize how essential it is that youth get involved now. I have developed so much in my own identity as an Indigenous woman, as well as just on a personal level, like understanding the importance of and significance of one person's life, and how much just seeing representation of yourself can completely change your mindset on things. So the ways that I've applied this to my life is, honestly, I've just been talking about it nonstop with my family and my friends. I'm constantly like explaining all these intricate aspects of archiving and its history, and ways that the white supremacist ideas are pushed through, because there's, we don't save who is archiving a certain collection. And for being Autumn, when we say, for instance, like sing a song, like the first thing you do is you say who dreamt the song, where the song is from, and who taught you. That is such an essential piece of the story. And to see that that hasn't been represented for so long, and then now to understand how impactful that is, and then to have my own hands as an Indigenous person on our own history, it, like I said, it blows your mind, because you realize just how much you can do for your community by just saving things in your life and asking others to do the same. So, thank you.
Thank you all. I really appreciate you all taking that time to go ahead and introduce yourselves and introduce kind of the things that have been really impactful to you about this work that we're doing. And so this is the end of the presentation part of it. And so we just want to leave up this slide for you all. If you would like to connect with us or learn more about the work that we're doing, here is pretty much all of our handles, CDA email, the email for Labriola, our websites, and then only our Instagram pages are linked here, but CDA does have a Facebook page as well that we do promote our events at. And then also recently we have been told that we are part of Sun Devil Giving Day. And so if you would like to go ahead and learn more about Sun Devil Giving Day and the ways in which you can support CDA and Labriola through your generous donation, we would love to have you as a person who does contribute to Sun Devil Giving Day for us, because that particular donation is going to go a long way in sustaining the work that we're doing and providing materials for Labriola and for CDA to continue to do the work that we're doing with our communities. And so for the next portion of this particular panel, we're just going to go ahead and have a conversation with the students about, again, continuing with the theme of how impactful this work has been to them and the ways in which it has showed up in their lives. And so, so the first question I wanted to go ahead and get the conversation started was regarding the intersections of your work and the communities that you belong to. And I just wanted to hear from each of you or whoever would like to speak at this particular time, how this journey through the work that CDA has done has impacted not just your possible career perspectives, with career paths moving forward with you all being students here at ASU. But I know that Elizabeth touched on this, and I believe you all did touch on this, about how that has impacted your personal lives and the ways in which you speak to your family or your friends where that particular aspect of your work with CDA is concerned.
I can go first, if that's okay. So I know, and that was a lot of my story, right, is the connection with my tribe. But on a personal level, also, because it gets a little sticky with the tribe and within itself, but my mom has a lot of collection on about our tribe, and a lot of it's a really big collection. And only recently, I've never really asked those questions of where she stores it or how it is, but I go in the garage now, or I saw actually the original copy she had of the Quito Paquito Cemetery book that was from my great grandmother, and it's in like a plastic bag, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, Mom! And now with this perspective, I'm like, oh no, like just stop. Like I now see it in such a different light, and I come from a family of like 9 sisters and 4 brothers, and so like the little ones are kind of like, Lulu, like, why are you freaking out? Like it's not even a big deal. Or like I go into the garage, I see these boxes that are like halfway open that have these little tiny like micro cassette tapes of our great grandmother of Philman Childs. Philman Bell Childs. She was one of our last speakers, or one of the many who just had the Hiacha dialect. There's a few speakers we still have to this day, but she recorded her speaking and those, that oral ancestral knowledge. And I'm freaking out, and it's like, oh my gosh, and now I understand. But still, like, I did an inventory. I looked over some of this material, and I had it on the kitchen table because we don't really have a space for it. And my sisters are just like, Lulu, what are you doing? And like all the little babies are like, they're huddled around, and they're just like, what? And so I can talk to them and teach them these things. And so it's just been a journey for me, but it's really affected just like my family, to my tribe, and just all around. Hugadai.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I would just say that it's definitely kind of, it's interesting. Like, they're like, you're young, you shouldn't even be worrying about this, right? But honestly, I'm super worried about it, especially knowing everything that we know now about how much we have lost. and wanting to preserve that. I think that for me in my life, the way that I've applied it is not only like the talking, but and then also seeing. I think for me, I am mixed. I'm half white, and I can see this divide within my family of like who has been able to preserve and who has not. And it is, you know, the Indigenous, the Chicano side of my family that hasn't had like as a like a Western form of archiving, like say with like the pictures and the documents and birth certificates, all that stuff, you know, like that is like all stored in some box somewhere. I probably don't even know where it is. And you know, and then knowing how much like I don't have, you know, information from her when she was my age, you know, like I don't even know if there's a picture of her when she was 23. And so that's where I love, you know, working with CDA, because that community driven piece of the archiving has really been what's kind of like impacted the way that I think about archiving in my day to day, because it kind of re-emphasizes how important it is, community memory is, how much that does need to be, you know, preserved in whatever way, whether that's a recording or you're writing it down, because that's how we are going to rebuild kind of all that history that we've lost.
Yeah, I definitely really echo that sentiment, Elizabeth. I think in terms of professionally, like my career has, or like working in the archives hasn't really impacted my career choices so much as it has informed them, as I mentioned earlier, like understanding the law through like storytelling and history and that sort of thing. But in terms of the way that it has impacted me personally, I've definitely become a lot more cognizant of the ways that my personal and familial and community histories have been preserved or not preserved. I've become very aware of how within South Asian history, because of a legacy of colonialism, much of our history is just destroyed. And in some cases, which is worse, I think, a lot of it has been totally fabricated or rewritten to fit a particular ideology of the colonizers. And so that is something that I've been dealing with more on like a larger scale level. But then on like a personal and familial level, I've also been thinking a lot about how the displacement of my own family through like partition and the War of 71 and all of these different historical events has led to me basically not having any like archival materials of past generations. Like at most I might have like a photograph or two of my grandparents, but the fact of the matter is like when they were running for their lives, they didn't have the state of mind to bring all of their artifacts with them. Um, and even like within my parents moving to the United States, um, they have like photographs from when they lived in New York or that sort of thing, but they didn't think about what they were doing in terms of archival memory. They were just trying to get by. They were trying to get a job. They were trying to move. They were trying to pay rent, that sort of thing. And so they weren't thinking about like we need to be preserving things for future generations, which is understandable, and I'm not faulting them for that at all. Like I probably wouldn't in the same situation either. But I think working in the archives has made me really cognizant of the fact that especially like within immigrant communities, that's just not on people's minds because it's more self-preservation, which is why, especially in newer immigrant communities, there is a lack of that consciousness of history, particularly like in Arizona with the South Asian community, with a lot of work I've been doing for research and community activism. There really is a lack of that sort of unity within Arizona's South Asian immigrant community that you don't see in other places like within New York or West Coast communities or that sort of thing. So it's painful for me to have this realization, definitely, because I know that like a lot of these memories and knowledge and everything is lost due to different circumstances, but at the same time, it also empowers me to remember that my own experiences are important and that I should be striving to document them in different ways, and also that now that I am aware, I can hopefully try to break this cycle as much as possible and try to document what I do know and make sure that that at least is passed on to future generations, be it like my own familial future generations or that of the larger community as a whole.
And then I just wanted to kind of note on the career path part of the prompt. Going forward, since I've learned so much about the library and how diverse it is, one of the things I've kind of come to realize is that a big part of libraries is database systems and how that is managed. And one of the more interesting things that I found, being someone who's come from a computing background, is how search terms can greatly impact what pieces of information that are shown to you through search queries. And so that can stem from anywhere from looking up, like Native American to American Indian, different things will come up depending on what you search from. Like another example is Black Indigenous peoples to Afro Indigenous terms. And so one of the things I kind of have been considering is going into the library science, the library information technology side. And so one of the things that has made me almost want to continue on this path is the fact that there already is a very low percentage of Indigenous people in STEM. And so I think having Indigenous hands on those search terms can definitely greatly impact how the algorithm is impacted moving forward for those generations who are going into archiving. And so that's kind of one of the things that I am keeping in mind as I'm going forward with this computer science path that I am on. Otherwise, yeah, that's kind of how big archiving has impacted me. And so I also really do enjoy not just Labriola, but the library as a whole. And so that's kind of one thing I just wanted to put out there. And thank you.
Well, thank you all for that. I really appreciate that. And I know personally that archives definitely can impact career trajectories, because before my time here at ASU and being an archivist, I was a paralegal for a really long time. And one of the reasons why I felt like I decided to become a librarian and transition into archives was because of my time here at ASU and in the library, and dealing with documents and dealing with just kind of the different ways in which libraries have that information and inform people. And so it definitely changed my entire career path and career trajectory on my own, to come in contact with the library and come in contact with archiving just in general. And so I really appreciate you all just kind of talking about that. And, I hope that the ways in which you are, showing up and doing your work at CDA does impact your careers moving forward, even if you don't decide to possibly become a archivist or a librarian at this time. There's always hope for you in a second career if you ever decide that you want to do a second career in something else, because that's exactly what happened to me. And so I wanted to move on a little bit, and I know that Lulu, you touched on this a little bit about how this particular work is intergenerational and understanding how younger generations can get involved with CDA work. And so I just wanted to ask you all if you could just speak to how you are talking to either your siblings or your cousins or your elders or anything along those lines about the work that CDA does and how important it is for younger generations to get involved with it. I know a couple of you touched on that already, but I would love to hear a little bit more from you all just about that particular topic.
So I would like to start off, just going real quick back to that last prompt. I just wanted to quickly include that just as important as it is as who is working behind the archives and organizing it, it's just as important who is behind those database systems, writing those algorithms. And so I just wanted to put that last part in, but moving on to this prompt, I have a younger sister who is in high school right now, and not to mention a couple of younger nieces and nephews who might not understand the whole archiving thing, but I have kind of talked to my younger sister about this, and one of the things that I've mentioned is how it's important now to start taking photos, you know, whether that's just family events or just school, because one of the things I realized in working with the Labriola social media postings, when we're kind of going through our different events, a lot of times we'll want to showcase a photo and talk about that photo as it pertains to the topic of the event. And so one of the things that one of the events that we've had recently was talking about education. And so I wanted to show a photo of something pertaining to school. And one of the things I realized is that at least my family, we don't have a lot of photos that have been taken. And so I think one of the main things is that photos are pretty powerful in telling a story. And so I've told her, you know, like, start taking photos now, because one of the things I've regretted throughout just even high school up to now is taking photos, because otherwise for one of the events for that event that we did have, I had to hack into one of my old Gmail accounts and look through my like photos that I had, and I found a photo of my uncle, who was the only one to graduate from NEU, and it was an old photo of him in his graduation cap and gown. And so that's one of the only photos that I have of someone like actually graduating school. Yeah, thank you.
You hear me? Okay, I have to give you my age. I'll be 69 pretty soon. I taught as a public high school teacher for 31 and a half years. And anyway, when I retired about 10 years ago, the tribe asked me to talk to elders. And I said, sure. And I said, what did I talk about? Elders. So anyway, long short, I put together all these photos that I had inherited, in a sense, from my parents, grandparents. I put them together, then I realized something. This is my message, is that my family had photos dating back to the 1920s and 30s. The sad on both sides of the family. And I told these elders, you guys can do this, but you need to document it, archive it, if you will. Because a lot of these people, I had no idea who they were. I couldn't turn to my dad. I couldn't turn to my grandparents. Who are these people? I had an idea, but I just did not know. And what she just mentioned, I think Mia just got through talking yesterday. My wife was fixing a computer, cleaning it up. She came across a computer that had been taken when I was in college, first year of junior college. So she called her grandddaughters over, and said, hey, look, can you see where's your grandfather at? Which one is this? It was I ran cross country. So it was a cross country team. And they looked, and one of them picked me out real quick. The little one looked around and said, oh, is that you? Okay. Who are those other people? I said, well, this is this boy, that's that kid, that's that kid, that's that kid, that's my coach. This guy right here, standing right here, that's Billy Mills. And the little one goes, you mean the runner? I said, yeah, this is taken in 1971. So things like that, you need to document them. And our tribe, I was really amazed at the photos. I just didn't realize that my grandmother's albums, I don't know who those people were. The other side of the family, this lady documented her family. I didn't know any of them. So things like that come around, and they may seem trivial. They may seem, why are you taking a picture now? Why? Which is what I say all the time. But on the road, it makes sense. So what you guys are doing, you just keep doing it. That's what you got to tell young kids. Young kids will do that all the time, like in high school. Picture day. Oh, most of the natives go, I don't want my picture. I don't want my picture. Do I have to go? What? Fast forward 6 months later, when they get their annuals, what do? First thing they do is open up and want to look at their picture. I said, hey, people, just take your picture. Thank you.
Thank you, Billy. I really appreciate that perspective because that really kind of brings home the thought process that, you know, as a young person, you sometimes don't want to take your picture or not have it documented or recorded, but thinking back on, you know, or, you know, thinking about future generations, like if you're not documented, like are you there, you know? And so I think that that's really important to kind of, you know, think about that and talk about that. And so I really appreciate that perspective. And thank you. And so I do want to be cognizant of people's time. And so I just had one other question for the students. I know that they brought up social media. And so I wanted to just talk very briefly about social media and how the ways CDA and Labriola do use their social media to connect with communities and to kind of blast out the work that we do. And so particularly on CDA's end, all of our students run our social media. And so we're super appreciative to our students who run our social media because they really, again, do bring home like that particular aspect of how important archiving is and the ways in which it can be connected to social media and the ways that social media can be used in order to promote this work. And so I don't know if Myra, Lulu, Mia, or Elizabeth would like to speak to how social media is used within the work that we do and the impact that it does have.
Yeah, I can speak on that since I am actually the one that manages the social media accounts for Labriola. And so, and Mia honestly had brought up aspect of our social media with the Miko Kings book. So every Monday we'll do posts on a quote from a book, you know, and kind of share with our audience like why they should be going to the library, why they should be going to Labriola, and you know what was impactful about these books and written by Indigenous folk, you know. But and then of course there's just so many ways to outreach to students to get involved in these events, and actually coming up pretty soon we're going to be creating a TikTok account. This kind of this is my idea. I know it sounds like, oh, like that's just some weird young people app or whatever, but it's actually a pretty populous place with every age range and community. And what I've seen on there is honestly just a lot of kind of click community forming. So you'll have like, for instance, you have like native TikTok. So it's crazy to see how much Indigenous people have been able to have kind of their voices uplifted and kind of find a community online where we can share and respect each other's culture. And that's why I want to, you know, hone in onto TikTok, because I feel like talking to these communities, putting information out there about archiving and its importance and the history of it and why it's impactful in our everyday life and our, you know, futures, families' lives. I think that's just a good way to get the conversation going, and that's what I really enjoy about our social media.
I guess very quickly to add on to that, I know we're like right at time, but I think as one of the student workers who handles the CDA social media, something that is particularly interesting and important to me about that is the ability of social media to very quickly and easily disseminate information, for better or for worse, as we have seen, obviously. But in the case of like the work that CDA and Labriola are doing, I definitely think that that is good, obviously, because with our mission of like breaking down barriers and breaking down the ivory tower, we're able to put things in language that is easy to understand, as well as a platform that is easy and accessible for people of all ages. Since we do have like an Instagram and Facebook both, we unfortunately don't have a TikTok. Elizabeth, you'll have to teach us how. But really that accessibility to all the different kinds of people is something that is really important to me. And so with the CDA account, not only do we share archival resources, but we also try to share other types of like health, wellness, or political resources. And so I feel like although we have been becoming afraid of social media in many ways, because of, again, like how it can be used for not so great reasons. I think that the work that we're able to do with it is really important, and it is how social media should ultimately be used in making sure that it is inclusive and just really breaking down barriers.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you all taking the time to be with us tonight. And I know, again, we're now over a minute of time, but if you don't mind staying, and if you would like to ask some questions, we would love to hear from you. It'll take a couple of minutes to answer some questions. If you're inclined to either unmute yourself or you can put one in the chat, we would absolutely love to answer any questions from the people who are gathered here tonight. So if you would like to answer or ask, please go ahead and do so.
My cat's sitting on the questions that I'm trying to, the notes that he's upset now, sorry. I mean, I have a couple, but I would be, I work here, so I'll maybe just be quiet again for like 10 or 15 seconds. Asking questions first used to be my thing. So if anybody wants to interrupt me, feel free. I also just want to say thank you all so much for not only like taking the time today to share your work, but like doing this work and living this work on a day-to-day basis. I just, again, feel so moved by everything that's happening. But I'd be kind of, or Ruben, your hand's up. Sorry, I know the hand raising feature is a little bit hard. Do you want to ask a question?
I'll wait for you to get done and then I'll ask.
Are you sure? You should go now. I'm like doing all of these events. Why don't you go ahead?
Come on,
Sure.
Ruben. All the way from the Tohono Nation. Come on.
Hey, good evening, guys. My name is Jeremia Vlog. I work at the Cultural Center Museum for the Tohono Nation, and I'm really excited about what you guys are doing and future generations. And right now, there's more Native Americans going in higher education than ever before, and the impact that you guys can make in communities. I guess working at the museum, I've seen how our archives have kind of been, they're sensitive, some of them, and we can't share a lot of it with non-O'odham, and there's a specific protocol that they have to go to get those materials for various reasons, and like we can't even do a virtual tour because of the content that's in our exhibits. We can't put that out as such, but people could come there. We don't allow them to take pictures, but it's just kind of how it is there. So my question was, so we just did a storytelling series. It went on for 6 weeks in a row, and in our stories, there's a lot of philosophies, there's a lot of protocols, there's a lot of it gives out details as to why we are the way we are. And then there's other aspect of it is if you participate in ceremony, you kind of pick up on these kind of do's and don'ts that we, as at least for me, as O'odham, that we're allowed to do and not to do. A lot of things we can't talk about out of ceremony. There's a lot of we can't display images of anything in our ceremonies, things like that. And so moving forward, like how do you guys, being that this is going to be something that you may potentially look into, going back to your communities and participating in things like storytelling and ceremony, and getting that perspective from your people, because I believe that's important, the protocols of how you're going to do this, because in academia, well, pretty much anybody has access to those archives, and that's good. I mean, that's good, and like I said, I'm excited about what you guys are doing, but I understand also from autumn perspective is that there is a lot that we can't put out there. So in terms of that, like, and then if there is sensitive material that you guys have that's specific to tribes, how do you guys handle that with those respective tribal members?
Go ahead,
Oh,
Myra.
I was going to say, Elizabeth, if you want to go first. Otherwise, I'm fine either way. Okay, I'll go ahead. So I think I don't want to speak specifically from the Odam perspective, since I'm not of that community, but with regards to the concept of like withdrawing or redacting information from archives, I think that's definitely something that we do explore a lot within community-driven archives. This idea, especially of forgetting, and the power of forgetting, because oftentimes communities have very like traumatic sorts of memories or materials or whatever that they think, when they weigh the pros and cons, they think it's better to not pass that on and have it be forgotten, so that future generations don't have that burden on them, weighing them down, or otherwise like mischaracterizing the community or something like that. And so with that, I think also comes this, like you have mentioned, thank you so much for this question. It's I think it's really wonderful to consider how you mentioned this idea of privacy, or having archives that are only accessible to members of the community itself. And I think that within the framework of community-driven archives, we definitely have capacity for this, because even if these materials are being held within an institutional archive, if they're being held within that institution with the permission and guidance of people of those communities, then it will be represented in a respectful way. But naturally, the ideal is for it to be held and housed within like facilities of that community itself, whether it be like a community member's home or like a community center or something like that. That would be the ideal, but naturally sometimes people don't have the resources to house those facilities themselves. So the ideal alternative would be making sure that the institutions are not only like agreeing to certain terms and respecting them, but to also make sure that they are employing people of that community who can make sure that that work is being done from the inside as well, and not that it's like a group of like white anthropologists or archivists making these promises that they won't actually understand or keep later on, but that there are also like Indigenous people involved in that institution and ensuring that those promises are kept in adequate ways.
Yes, exactly. I think that was, the portion that I was going to go into was, there's kind of like that question, an amazing question. Thank you. And it's something that I think about often, working with at Labriola with all sorts of Indigenous archiving material, and knowing some of those protocols, being on them, and knowing that we have to protect it. And I guess when I think about this going forward, and Alex has jokingly said that I was going to switch my major like in the beginning of this, and for some reason that's like stuck, because I freaking love this, and I want to make strides in solving problems like that, because I think that incorporates not only having Indigenous people being the archivists, and working with members of the community, like directly working with their own materials, and making sure that have all those permissions and stuff like from the elders, and making sure to, I guess, have a baseline of agreements of like where we start. And then I think it incorporates the computer side of it as well, like what Mia was saying when it comes to the search terms and stuff like that. So I know Alex has mentioned just kind of ideas that have bounced around, and I don't know if I can say them or what. Alex?
Feel free. I mean, I'm not 100% sure what you're referring to, but
I'm talking about with Henry.
Oh, okay. Just to keep it short, is I did add a case study link that the ASU library was part of that was published recently from the Society of American Archivists that touches on this. And I mean, there's two kind of tiers that we're talking about. We're talking about the standard kind of archival profession take on archives and that more custodian type of approach that we're all accustomed to. But then with CDA, which is a contrast to that, it's more to say that we have the power to make these decisions, because the institutions, unfortunately, have rigged it up in a way where many of us are not even aware about what we're talking about now, and we're not aware how to plug in and how to engage. So like, to me, CDA is our entry, whether you're Black or Chicano or queer or Indigenous, to be able to reclaim that authority, because that's what we hold. And so with CDA, that's the way that we can push back compared to like being pushed out. And so with our case study, there was a contrast between what we have in our collection, or what we've had up to this point at ASU, and how it's filtered through the protocols for Native American archival material, which does adhere to many CDA tenets that we're talking about. And so with Elizabeth's referring to, I mean, we are in the works of working with Indigenous faculty and community members around a content management system that addresses protocols with the guidelines of community protocols. Won't say too much now, just because it's still a work in progress, but it's definitely other institutions who are listening, key word here, are trying to rectify these past history that we're talking about. And so I think with CDA, with all the work Nancy Godoy and Jessica and all her team, and now us, we're making that space to really ask these questions. And it's more a culture change compared to this lip service that many people want, to adopt the protocols. Many people want to have a land statement. Many people want to have these EDI initiatives, but the work is to one, create that space within the institution to advocate for this. So we're there, but two, you need to also support and hire us. So I'm glad to hear there's some interest from our students, whether you're taking this into the law to have that perspective, because maybe Myra will inspire legal aid down the road. Hey, you should be an archivist, right? Or some type of community, librarian or something, along with what Elizabeth's saying, and so on. And so I think, to me, not case study, but CDA is really opening the door to these possibilities. And so we can have even this conversation. And so that's just my take, and relates to what Elizabeth said.
Keep in mind, again, this is Billy, old retiree. When I would speak to non-native audiences, my image doesn't come out. Like I said, I taught in a public high school, so I dress differently. When natives would see me, they look at me and say, "Oh, hey, who died?" All right. Oh, hey, this is the way I dress when I work. All right. With non-native audiences, I told them, look, the point I want to get across to you is that natives, Autumn, Gila River, Hemoth, if you will, we are not museum pieces. Don't expect me to dance for you, sing for you, bring out artifacts. That's not in my background. Okay, this is what we are. And I use history, and military history is very strong with us. And I go in through that. Earlier you mentioned what's protected, what's not protected. You got to understand, somewhere along the line, 100, 150 years ago, elders made the decision, village elders made the decision somewhere, and I'm talking basically addressing all of them. What do we do with this ceremony? What do we not do with that ceremony? And somewhere somebody said, let it go. The example I give, I read about, I haven't seen it, is it used to be celebrated in every 4 years in one of the key villages, mother villages in Vanuatu. When the war came in, a lot of men left. They did not return. So when they tried to do that ceremony again, the elders looked around and they said, wait a minute, these guys are gone. This dancer is gone. This man is going to be, what do we do? The ceremony went by the wayside. Okay. It goes back to traditional. I always, look at me and they say, are you traditional? And I said, well, I like to think I am. Oh, I love that air conditioning. I love my truck. I love cable TV. And so, what are we talking about? Well, for me, the way I was raised there in Navajo, Casablanca, my dad made us work. My uncle, before he died, he sat me down and told me, don't ever go around and borrow money from people. He said, don't ever. I tried to argue with them. I said, but there's some people that do that. And he said, oh, yeah. Whatever you want, you work for it. Work, work, work. And that's what my father did, and that's what I saw. And to me, that's what comes. To me, that's what's autumn is, and that's what I try to tell young people. You look at the pictures, the drawings rather. Who will come? You don't see who sitting there underneath the button. They're always out working. Autumn, you say, what? Different word. That's what it is. Again, elders made the decision somewhere along the line. Just like today, we're making the decision. Well, am I going to go back and live in a mud house, or do I want a new home with air conditioning? Well, I know what I want. I'm getting old. It's too hot. All right. I love that turkey. I can't wait for Thanksgiving. That. Well, you're not traditional. And I said, no, I got a car outside. One time I tried to ride my horse and I went outside, it went home. It doesn't work like that. There are changes that always come, pluses and minuses. And that's what makes natives. That's what makes autumn. You look back in the history. I used to use a book, Black Elk Speaks, and that's what he taught. He said, you can travel, I'm paraphrasing, you can travel this road, man road, pick up the stuff that is bad, look at it, throw it away. Pick up the stuff that's good. And that's what autumn is. We're not static. You can't put a period here and say this and this and this. Earlier I made the statement about pictures. Now you guys are talking about what? iPad images, flash drives, what? Why? What are you talking about? Translate for me. I'm old. I get. What do you mean? All right. So that's what we need to do to survive at the best possible level.
Thank you, Billy. Really appreciate you, speaking and talking about that. And so, again, just to kind of be cognizant of people's time, I did want to address Claire's question here in the chat. And so Claire asked, is there always agreement within communities about what must be kept private? I know there are customs, but are there ever generational divides? Are there ever disagreements within communities, or is it always pretty clear? And so I feel like Billy did touch a little bit on that, but I don't know if anybody else would like to address that very quickly before we go ahead and wrap up.
I guess to keep it brief, yeah, that's like the nuance to what we're saying that, at least in my experience, I think everyone here, obviously we come from different communities, different backgrounds, but that it really comes down to having that community conversation to determine those protocols. And I feel that the institutional approach to archiving doesn't allow that, because it's just a donor in this case who may be some white anthropologist or researcher who's taking material to, say, an institution like ASU and dictating protocols without involving the community. In contrast to what we're saying is that literally in these workshops, in these events, we're having these conversations, and it's really starting at a family level. And one thing I hope, in the work that I do in the years to come, is that when community members on the individual level to their own family, as was shared here, with some of the students, how they're having these internal conversations with family, that leads to a nuance in itself, because what if one side of the family says this and the other side says that? And so granted, those are all fluid conversations, but then it eventually branches off to the community. Or just imagine having a CDA event like at a family reunion, right? In like some huge gymnasium of like 100+ people. That would be interesting to kind of figure out what's what and what will be shared. And so I think community-driven archives really allows that space to talk about these things. And everybody's going to be different. In my opinion, speaking as an author, you know, in a village level, right? And that's what Billy was referring to in terms of this different aspects of O'odham culture. Some might say don't do this, but others say, hey, we're going to do that. You know, it just depends on who they are and their background, and that's okay, and that's their protocols. But yeah, I mean, there's the cultural ones that's a little different, but you know, even just on an access level, we'll say, is that when these things come up. But that's all I can really say. I don't want to keep talking, but yeah, that's just roughly my take on that question.
Thanks, Alex. Really appreciate your input on that. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you so very much for this. I know that we are way over time, but this conversation was really important and so informative to not just myself, but to everybody who was here. And I just want to thank each of our students, Myra, Mia, Elizabeth, and Lourdes, Lulu, we call her Lulu, to be here tonight to speak about the work that CDA does. We are so very thankful for you all, and we greatly appreciate you embracing this work and taking it on and, you know, propelling it out into the universe in a way that I don't think when Nancy started this, that she really had an idea of just how impactful this particular work was going to be. Not just to her, but to everybody involved within. So I just wanted to thank you all for being here. And Jake, I don't know if you have any last minute things that you would like to say to go ahead and wrap us up.
I think really also, I mean, you thanked the students, and I think that we would just thank Labriola and CDA for also modeling for other institutions and organizations how to live out their values and live out that practice, right? So I think that's just like, that's the only additional gratitude that I really have to offer. And then of course, everybody for coming and staying an extra 23 minutes with us. You know, certainly this is kind of a lifelong practice that CDA is articulating, and we certainly have more life to live. So if you would like to get in touch with Alex or Jessica at either Labriola or CDA initiative, if you have more questions about those practices or are interested in maybe setting up an event, doing some sort of presentation, plenty of more events with the NEA Big Read, but we don't like, you know, that's good. Find us online. We're totally fine. So take the feedback survey, go to more events, hit us up for things. And thank you all so much for everything. Just really wonderful presentation, really affirming. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool. Goodbye, everybody. Have a good night. See everyone soon.
Mahalo, everybody.
Cool.
Stay
Thanks,
safe.
Luann. You too.
Thanks,
Take
guys.
care.
Hey, Jess. Hey,
Good
Nancy.
to see you guys again. Have a good one.
Thanks.
Love you guys. Talk to you later.